Okay, so in this video, we're going to be looking at two different things. So the first one is going to be this view that we're looking at on the screen, which is the rib cage, really the thoracic cage, because we're going to be talking about the sternum as well. So I'm going to, once again, label it off, kind of discuss what it is, and then we can kind of go from there. But a couple things I want you to pay specific attention to is the names of the bones, the numbers associated with them, and then what is their purpose. Okay, so number one, I've blocked off the ribs on this right-hand side over here. I've blocked it off by section. Okay, so we're going to first label these. So these are what's called true ribs. Okay, and what that means is that if you are able to see on the screen how you have bone here and then you have cartilage here. But what you'll notice is that the cartilage connects the bone directly to the sternum. So on all 7 pairs of these true ribs, okay, you're going to have cartilage that's connecting the bone to the sternum, the rib to the sternum. So what I want you to pay specific attention to is how it changes as we go. So true ribs, there are actually 14 of them or 7 pairs of them because you have one on each side. The next section is going to be called false ribs. And what you'll notice about those is there are 6 of those. So there's 3 pairs of them. But you'll notice that their cartilage is going to connect to other cartilage. It's not connecting straight to the bone like in the true ribs. So that's going to change their function slightly in that they allow a little bit more flexibility. Then at the bottom, these are called floating ribs. So there are 4 of those or 2 pairs of those. And you'll notice that those are only connected to the vertebrae. They are not connected to the sternum at all. That's what makes them floating ribs. Okay, so if the question were to come up, how many ribs do you have? The answer is 24. Okay, and how we're getting that is we're saying 14 true ribs, 7 pairs. We're doing 6 false ribs, 3 pairs. 4 floating ribs, 2 pairs. And if you add those up, that's where we're getting 24. Okay, so that's kind of what I want you to know about the ribs themselves. Now, the cartilage here is called costal cartilage. Now, its purpose, like I said a few minutes ago or earlier the other day, is it allows flexibility. So number one, you can breathe, and that allows that expansion of your chest when you take a deep breath in. Your ribs have some flexibility, but it also helps to provide structure so you're able to move your body, but it still provides a support so that your organs inside, like your heart and your lungs, stay protected because of the structure of the rib cage. Okay, now we're going to shift for a minute. So on the left side, what we're looking at is we're going to label off the parts of the sternum. Now the sternum is this bone here in the middle, and we're labeling the parts of it. Okay, so the top part up here is going to be called the manubrium. The manubrium. The middle part is called the body of the sternum. And then this bottom part is called the xiphoid process. Okay, so 3 parts of the sternum. Manubrium is the most superior, or the top. The middle is the body. The bottom is the xiphoid process. So now you can see the ribs on the right, how they're kind of broken down, how the sternum is broken down on the left side. Now we're going to switch to the vertebrae. So what we're looking at here is the spinal column or the vertebral column, and how it's broken down by section. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the page where it starts with number 1, it's looking at what do you name the first and second vertebrae. Okay, so we're going to actually come back to that in just a moment. We're going to start with number 5, okay, because 3 and 4, we're not learning that right now, so we're going to stick to what we need to know. Number 5 is talking about these top vertebrae. So basically, the vertebrae that make up the bones in your neck. So these are going to be called cervical vertebrae. Now, something that's important to note about those is that there are 7 of them. Okay, 7 cervical vertebrae. So the way you refer to these is C for cervical, and then whatever number you're talking about. So in this case, that's C4. Okay, so if I say C4, C5, C1, all of that is referring to a specific bone within the cervical vertebrae. The next section is called thoracic. Okay, and there are 12 of those. And they follow the same kind of thing as the cervical. So you would say T7, T11, T6, all saying T for thoracic and the number starting from the top going down. The next section is lumbar vertebrae. Okay, there are 5 of those. So same thing, L4, L2, L3, all of that is referring to the lumbar vertebrae. This bottom piece that's labeled as number 8, okay, it's called the sacrum, and it is actually one bone, okay, but it is actually 5 bones fused together to make one bone. So I'm just going to write 5 fused to 1. So you only need to know it as one bone called the sacrum, but do know that it is 5 bones fused together. Now, the bottom part, the very bottom where it's labeled number 9, okay, it is going to be called the coccyx. Okay, and it's kind of the same idea as the sacrum. It's 4 fused bones into one called the coccyx. So if someone were to ask you, how many vertebrae do you have total? You have 33 vertebrae, if you include the sacrum and the coccyx as separate bones, okay? So there's 33 because you have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, technically 5 fused bones for the sacrum and 4 fused bones for the coccyx. And if you add all that up, that's where we're getting 33 from. Now, so the way it was taught to me, okay, which I think is helpful, and I've mentioned this to several of you, is 7. Think about like the time you start school or the time you eat breakfast. Okay, so typically people would eat breakfast at 7 a.m. That's supposed to be an A. And then the 12 would be the typical time you would eat lunch. And then some people, this may differ, but 5 o'clock would be a time that people would eat dinner. So if that helps you kind of keep them straight, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, based on breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that can be a way to keep it straight. And then this part on the left that I kind of skipped at the beginning. So the first and second cervical vertebrae have specific names, okay? So I'm going to label these as C1 because that's what we just talked about. But their name is actually atlas. So if you ever hear somebody refer to the atlas, okay, or the atlas bone, they're talking about C1. Okay, C2 is going to be called the axis. Okay, the axis, because C2 kind of fits up. There's a portion of C2 that fits up into C1. Okay, so C1 is able to rotate on top of C2. But know those as atlas and axis, but understand that they are just part of the cervical vertebrae. So, just to recap very quickly, I need you to know the sections: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, coccyx. Know the numbers. So if I were to say, or if you see on the anatomage table, 12, find T12, C4, L2, you see any of those things, that you know how to find them based on their location within the vertebrae. But keep in mind that we are starting from the top going down. So like this would be T1 and this would be T12. So it's going from top to bottom, counting in sequential order. So I need you to know atlas and axis, the sections here, and the numbers associated with each one. And then going back to the previous picture, number of ribs, true, false, floating, how those and why those are called true, false, and floating, the costal cartilage that connects the ribs to the sternum, and then the parts of the sternum, the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process.